2021, and what a year has been already. Certainly was an interesting year in 2020, no doubt about that. But we are moving forward, as I say, forward march. We always want to thank our sponsors, AwareWig.club and Eastern Offset Printing out of Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. Today, we're going to be asking some serious questions to our medical professionals about the COVID-19 vaccine. I hope you guys will join in with us for all of this great information that we will be discussing today. You know, one of the big questions that I have for, especially in my community and my industry, the fight community, and the question would be, would you consider taking the COVID-19 vaccine if it meant you could get back to normal faster and get more, you know, have more Muay Thai kickboxing events or sporting events in general? Would you take that vaccine? And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that and kind of uncover some of the myths and things like that that are being thrown around out there. And so we're going to get right into it. Guys, again, like us on Facebook and our YouTube channel as well. First off, though, we're going to go ahead without any further ado, and we're going to bring up our nurse Bernstein. I always get that right, Nurse Bernstein Godine. She has been in the business for a very, very long time. I wouldn't say 100 years, but when I say 100 years, some people don't know that I don't really mean it like that. That's just kind of like the way I say it. You know, for everyone and all, but she's been in the business for a very, very long time. Today is really try to, you know, really break down the idea about the COVID and how we can, you know, navigate this thing and do what we need to do, right, to try to get past this very, very difficult era that we have with the COVID, right? And I think that, you know, understanding the better understanding the vaccinations and things like that, I think is a huge, huge part of it. And so we certainly want to make sure that we can, you know, speak about this and do it intelligently. And I hope you guys just keep an open mind, if you will. And I know a lot of you have your minds made up right now about what you want to do and how you want to do it and what you're not going to do and all that. Nobody's going to make you, but I just think that there's some things that we really need to discuss and perhaps, you know, get more information out so that we can, you know, maybe educate people. I always say education is the key to understanding. And ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, there she is, Nurse Godine there, guys. This is Bernstein Godine. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. You were very clear, but you sound like you're distance now.
Okay, I don't know why. Can you hear me better now?
Oh, I can still hear you. Yes,
Oh,
that's really
okay.
okay.
Okay, good, good. Well, let's hope that, you know, that I'll cut my volume up a little bit more and maybe that'll help and everything, and then we will go from there. But hopefully, I really appreciate that you will, you know, taking them on. I know you're busy going 100 miles an hour and everything. Such a serious lady you are. I mean, I gotta go back. I gotta go back for a moment. When you were at our East Coast Classic, boy, I don't know, boy, people had you. They were calling you Nurse Ratchet, right? You were making people doing those temperature checks and washing those hands, sanitizing those hands. I mean, amazing though. I thought that that was absolutely perfect, and you're exactly what we're looking for. That's why I want to call on you more often than not to, you know, to come on in shows like this, so that you know, you can give your impression and your ideas about what is going on, because you know there's a lot of things going on out there right now about the COVID, and people are, you know, really skeptical about the vaccine. Now that we have the vaccine, people are kind of skeptical about taking it. And first of all, before I get too far though, could you tell us a little bit about what you do on a daily basis, Nurse Godine?
Now I am a home health nurse. I take care of, I do IVs. I go into the patient's home. When you come home from having surgery, or if you come home from having a heart attack, diabetes, hypertension, any medical condition, I come out in your home and I do several things. I start IV, I do wound care, I do med teaching. We're seeing a lot of COVID patients right now, so I'm taking care
Mm.
of a lot of patients, and unfortunately, a lot of patients I take care of have COVID even before they make it to the hospital. I am the one that diagnosed their symptoms
Ah,
to the hospital.
right. So I am hearing a little of that grind in your speaker right now as well. Just FYI, I don't know if you can bring it closer to you or whatever the case might be, but I am hearing something that you're saying that you were saying a little bit earlier. But yeah, that's a real interesting field. So you're more like a home care nurse right now, correct?
Correct.
And you're dealing. That's perfect. And you're dealing with a lot of people that have the COVID right now. A lot of your patients.
I've had a lot of patients that I've sent to the hospital who are still hospitalized. Unfortunately, I've had 3 to die within the last
Right. Right. Within the last what?
week.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry to hear that. Wow. Well, no, that's good. I read a lot of your Facebook stuff, and you post a lot of things, a lot. You know, putting those model daughters. I don't know if they're your daughters or daughter-in-laws or whatever you have there. You put a
That's
lot
my
of things.
daughter. That's
That's
my
your daughter.
daughter.
Beautiful, beautiful family. Beautiful
Thank
family.
you.
But you seem to put a lot of things out there trying to educate people about the COVID and how serious it is. What is your real point and your real message about the COVID-19?
Well, let me share with you what just happened 3 days ago. I went to a patient home who just had a hip replacement, and she asked me, should she go to this big gathering that her family was having? And I said, only if everybody was going to be practicing safe, washing their hands, making sure they wear their masks, etc. And I got cursed out by her family members. And
Oh,
she called me back to inform me that everyone now has tested positive except her because she followed the guidelines.
wow.
Another incident a week ago happened, the exact same thing. I got cursed out. And unfortunately, I asked them to be careful around the patient, and the patient has died.
Oh my. Oh my. That is so it's serious, you know. How hard is it for you to try to convince people how serious this is? And that although there are certain ways that you can, I use the word that Dr. Lucas used, mitigate it and all that, but it is serious, right? How hard is it to try to convince, in particular, the African American community?
It is the most challenging thing I've had to do, and the reason being is because so many people have been told so many false information, and they do not believe that it's real. The only folks that are believing it's real is once it hit home, but we're trying to prevent it from hitting home.
Right, right. I noticed that a lot of the networks, they'll have people on that say, I didn't believe it at first, and now my daddy's died, or my mama's died, or I got it,
Exactly.
and I almost died, and stuff like that. A little bit too little, too late.
Yeah, because I'm still seeing, I'm very worried about the number, black and brown people, who are still gathering and they are not taking it seriously. And you're talking about this vaccination. Even my own son just told me that once I take it, and if he see that I don't die from it, then maybe he'll take it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of that. And I had a similar experience where people who are just denying taking. Now, you've taken the vaccine, correct?
Yes, I'm getting ready to take my second one in 2 weeks. I've taken, and my niece, who I post on Facebook, she's a doctor. She's taking her second one.
So tell me about your anticipation leading up to that vaccine. I mean, as a medical professional, were you just like, okay, I'm going to do it because I believe in medicine? Or were you a little bit based on all the misinformation out there? Were you a little bit skeptical at first as well?
I am in a support group on Facebook that has about 140,000 healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, paramedics, you
Mhm.
name it.
Right.
And we post pictures of family members and loved ones who've been affected by it. And like we all say, if you don't believe it's real, or if you're worried about the side effects of the vaccination, walk into our world for just one day and see what we're seeing.
Okay. So the fact that you know that it's real and trying to convince people of that is more difficult, but at the same time, those skeptical people out there, you're saying, come into and walk a mile in your shoes, seeing the people dying, seeing the sickness that it really causes, maybe they'll change their mind.
Yes. And hopefully when they see brown and black faces taking the test, just like my son said, even though he said it jokingly, if we nurses and doctors, etc., are taking it, and we're not afraid, we're not asking you guys to take it and then we'll take it. So we're not using you as guinea pigs. A lot of folks are thinking back to that trial that happened years and years ago.
Yeah.
But we are on the front line taking the test. So if I take it, you darn sight should want to take it.
Right, right. Well, I think that's what a way that we can use social media in a positive way, right?
You
Where
see, I
you
keep
know,
posting up there. My son, my son just went back to California and he
right,
traveled quite a bit. He came from a hot spot, but we practice all the things that they tell you to do. And praise God, I posted last night. His COVID test is negative. And
right,
he's
right.
been, and we went skiing, we went places, we've been around other people, but we practice the things that they ask us to do. So you don't have to stay in the house, but you do need to practice the things that you've been encouraged to do. As I did with your guys, wash your hands, put your mask on. Yeah, I got called some names, but I'll do it again.
Well, we want you to do it again in March,
Yeah,
right?
I'll do it again.
Right, March 19th and 20th, and maybe 21st. We're looking forward to you being at that door again and doing exactly what you did because I thought it was awesome. And look, like I said, my hands were peeling from from my sanitizer when I left. I'm like, and my ears were hurting because of the mask. I mean, I love that. That is exactly what we need. I know Dr. Lucas, who we're going to have on in a moment, and hopefully Dr. Davis will be on as well. She was at a conference and everything, a little bit earlier today.
Uh-oh, lost you again.
What do you think the most gut wrenching thing is that you've had to deal with in this COVID era?
The loss of lives. One of my best friends, you may know her, she's a singer, Angie Stone. She's world known. Her
Angie
mother
Stone.
just
Yeah.
her mother just expired 2 days ago. Um,
Wow.
and she came. The number my sister and my brother-in-law had it. Thank God they did get. But I lost another sister-in-law. I've lost
Mm.
quite a. I lost an aunt. I've lost quite a few family members. This is and another thing is I was doing the AIDS era. I had a nurse that worked with me that got stuck by a needle. She was the first healthcare worker on
Oh,
the East Coast to get AIDS when they thought we couldn't get it from a needle stick. But we knew then how to get it. This little secret, you don't know. You don't
right.
know, and it doesn't show any symptoms. And so the thought that people are not wanting to get the vaccination, I don't get paid. I'm not getting paid to say this. I'm speaking as a nurse of 37 years so
Yeah.
that we can get back to some type of normalcy because we're getting depressed and it's causing you to have other medical problems. I strongly encourage. I'm trying to get my mother and my father vaccinated. I just signed up today to become a nurse to give the vaccine. I'm gonna do all I can on my part.
Right. Well, you just jumped right to my last question. I was going to ask you about your best argument, for people, about why they should take the vaccine, and I think you just said it, and I really appreciate. I appreciate you, right? And
Thank
who
you,
you are.
thank you, thank
I
you for
want
having
you.
me.
I want you to keep doing what you're doing. Okay, keep
Thank you,
doing what you're doing. I think it's so important to our society as a whole. Thanks so much. That's been a good
thank you
time
for
for being
having
on.
me. Thank you for
All right.
having me. Bye bye.
Yes, we'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye bye.
Okay.
All right, Nurse Gordine, ladies and gentlemen, we were speaking with her because she's been, like I said, she's been in the business for 37 years. That is a long, long time. And so she knows exactly what she's talking about. And we always appreciate her taking a moment today. She has to get back to some clients and everything. So what we're going to do, we will be, I had a kind of lineup here in the direction I was going to go. Things change. You got to be ready to rock and roll. We'll probably have Nurse Dr. Davis on a little bit later here, but we're going to go ahead and get into it. And the reason why I was going to have Dr. Lucas last, because I'm a little long-winded with Dr. Lucas, because he is our fight doctor and everything. But I'm going to go ahead and bring him on now. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Dr. John Lucas, sir, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Johnny?
I'm doing just fine. I appreciate you taking a moment there to come on today, Doc.
No problem.
We have you on often and everything, but the advice and information that you give is so, so, so important and vital to not only our fight community, but just to the general public. So I hope that people will take a moment and listen to the things you have to say. And again, if Dr. Davis comes on, we will, kind of end up with that'll be the caboose today, right? And end up with some conversation with her. But could you take a moment there? And I'm kind of gonna dig a little bit. You know me, Johnny Davis Live, real talk and real solutions. Break down a little bit about what a vaccine is and how it kind of works.
Sure. So, we'll talk about that broadly, then we can talk specifically about the COVID vaccine that's available in the United States now. But the idea behind a vaccine is to give your body exposure to something that it can then mount an immune response against, that it would be close enough to the whatever agent is you're trying to vaccinate against, so that if you're exposed to that agent, your immune system has already seen it and go, aha, that's it. So I tell you, it's kind of like if you had, if you had Jerome work in security and there was someone who said, hey, I'm going to go punch Johnny Davis. And you're like, okay, it's a 6 foot tall, white guy with blonde hair and he's got an eye patch over his eye. If you tell Jerome that, he's going to be looking for a guy who's 6 feet tall with blonde hair and an eye patch. And when he sees him and you go, that's the guy that wanted to punch Johnny, and probably be able to stop it before he gets in and does that. As opposed to the way your immune system works without having that sort of pre-knowledge that you get from a vaccine would be sitting around and he wouldn't know that guy wanted to punch you until he did. And, you're still going to be better off fighting that guy off with Jerome grabbing him and dragging him out than having to do it all by yourself. But it's not going to be as effective as having him stop at the door and never get at you in the first place. So with the coronavirus vaccine in particular, what it does is it makes your body actually produce little segments of the spike protein that's on the outside of the virus. And your body sees that and knows that it's not supposed to be there. So it mounts an immune response against it. But since it's only a piece of the virus, it itself doesn't have the ability to give you coronavirus. There's no way you can get coronavirus from the RNA vaccine. But since your body has seen that spike protein, at some point in the future, if you get exposed to the coronavirus and it enters your body, the coronavirus is literally covered with those spikes. That's where the name comes from. The corona or crown comes because when you look at this under a microscope, it actually looks like the medieval mace, that ball with the spikes sticking out from it. Right. And your immune system sees those spikes and goes, I know what those are. Those are bad. And it will attack them right off the bat before the coronavirus has a chance to do its thing and actually make you sick. So it kind of primes your body's immune system to be able to attack an invader without giving the invader a chance to start doing its thing before the immune system has a chance to realize that stuff's not supposed to be there.
Wow. Boy, now that is a thorough breakdown. That's why I like to have you on. I love to have it. So people are talking about natural immunity, and then they're talking about the induced immunity, right?
Right.
All right, the natural immunity, I guess the concept of that is that you catch it, you build up antibodies or something, and then they basically fight off the virus. Is that the idea for the natural?
That is correct. Yeah. Right. So natural immunity. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please. Yes.
Natural immunity is exactly that. If you get an infection and you survive, which is an important step, because if you don't survive, then
doesn't matter.
That's not so cool. Right. And there's 300,000+, almost 400,000 Americans now that did not survive this. Right. If you do survive, then your immune system will have seen the coronavirus, will have successfully fended it off, and you should have immunity to it. Right. And so far, it seems like people getting second infections with coronavirus, it happens, but it's exceedingly rare. Right. So it seems like for most people, once you've had the coronavirus, you have an immune response and the ability to fight it off if you get exposed to it again for some period of time. We don't know exactly what that period of time is, but it seems like it's at least months, plural, and it could be even longer than that.
Wow.
So, but you already kind of stumbled across the downside of natural immunity is if you get natural immunity, that means you've had the infection. So you've incurred 100% of the risk of the infection. And if you're young and healthy, that's correct. The risk to you is relatively low, but not everybody is young and healthy. And even people who are young and healthy sometimes still do have very serious complications from the coronavirus infection. So to say, I want to get natural immunity, what you're saying is, well, I want to get the infection and see what happens. And for most people, that's probably not a great option.
Right, because you don't know how your body's going to handle it, and so the idea of the herd immunity makes no sense because it will also probably overwhelm our hospitals. Well, it very well could, right?
Possibly, yeah. It's hard. That's a hard thing to know. But given the number or the percentage of people who seem to need some sort of hospital support, not necessarily even ICU support, but just need a hospital bed and need more than can happen easily at home, or need devices like oxygen concentrators became very scarce in South Carolina recently because so many people needed them. The chance that you'd be able to take up all of the available supplies of one form or another would be a lot higher if you just let coronavirus run rampant through the community. Because,
Right.
You hear the term flatten the curve, and we're now 9 months into what we thought was going to be a couple of weeks to flatten the curve.
Right.
But the idea behind trying to avoid super large gatherings where people aren't taking precautions is, if you have 10,000 people in this imaginary community that are going to get coronavirus, you would rather have 1,000 people get it at a time over the course of 10 months than all 10,000 people get it simultaneously.
Right.
It's just like with an ER. If you go to any major metropolitan area, say their ER sees 1 gunshot a day, so 365 a year, and they can handle that no problem. But if somebody shows up to a school and shoots 365 people at the same time, then the ER is not going to be able to handle that because they only have 1 or 2 trauma surgeons. They can't see 365 people simultaneously. So they're trying to, the idea behind the community level prevention efforts, like the nurse was just talking about trying to avoid large gatherings, making sure you're doing good hand hygiene, trying to keep physical spacing, wearing your mask and things like that, is to try to reduce the number of people that have this infection at any given time. And especially now that the vaccines are becoming available, it's really important to do that now, because if you can push your potential infection a month or 2 in the future,
Right.
you might very well be able to get yourself immunized, and you are substantially less likely to get severe consequences from a COVID infection if you've had the vaccine.
Yeah, I'm just really confused about, a little bit about the fact that the COVID-19 has been around 9-10 months or so, at least most of 2020, and we knew that they were working on a vaccine. Okay, I'm just a little disturbed by the slowness and distribution of this. Could you tell me? I'm like, if I could ask this question in a way, if you were president of the, I'm not gonna say president, that's too much, too political. But let's say if you were a magician and you could imagine things and make things happen, what would be your rollout of the vaccine? Knowing that we had the COVID, knowing that we had a vaccine on the way, how would you have handled this? Just hypothetically.
Yeah, so there's a couple of issues, and there's basically 3 groups involved, and all 3 groups are currently spending a lot of time pointing the finger at each other.
Yeah.
About who's responsible for the because the rollout of the vaccine has been a major disappointment, and everybody's upset about that.
Yeah.
So one, you gotta make the stuff. So you can only make this so fast. So
Right.
that's one problem. So for instance, like South Carolina gets something in the neighborhood of 60 or 65,000 doses of the vaccine. I don't know if it's a week or a month, but there's a limit to how many they get. So
Right.
you can only distribute what you have. That's been the biggest problem, is getting it from the federal government and into places where it can be physically given. So like our hospital system has vaccinated a large number of people. In South Carolina, just a couple days ago, opened the vaccine up to people who are sick, I think 70 and older, regardless of their health status. So both my parents fit in that category, and they're trying to get on the list for a vaccine, but they can't get an appointment because there's not places for it yet. So people were rallying against the hospital system, saying, hey, why don't you have, places set up to give this vaccine? And the hospital system said, we have that all planned out, but we don't have the vaccine to give you. So it doesn't make any sense to send 35 nurses out into these, portable buildings in the parking lot and have this thing all set up and have people show up and say, well, I'm glad you're here, but we don't have a vaccine to actually give you. So there's lots of issues. And then there's other places where they've gotten the vaccine, but they hadn't thought really apparently at all about how they were going to distribute it. And there's been doses that have been thawed. And once you do that, this has the Pfizer vaccine that's being used in most places in the US has to be kept at unbelievably cold temperatures.
Right.
And once you take it out of those unbelievably cold temperatures, there's only a certain limit of time that it's still viable before the actual vaccine breaks down and wouldn't be useful. And they've had places that have done a poor job at either scheduling patients or coming up with mechanisms for distributing the vaccine, that they've actually had to waste some doses of it because of that. So it's a logistics problem that was not well handled. So if I were in charge of that, the first thing I would do would be figure out, okay, under perfect circumstances, how many doses of this can we produce, per day, per week, whatever. And then once you figured that out, you got to figure out who are you going to give it to, meaning like what states, what government agencies are you going to put in charge of distributing the vaccine. And then you have to make sure the people who are receiving the vaccine have a plan in place and ready to go for, we're getting, 100 doses of the vaccine. These are the 100 people who are going to get the doses, and this is when we're going to give it to them. So it's people get nervous about talking about the military, but I think that involving some people with some military experience, like the National Guard, there's lots of folks who were really used to getting large amounts of stuff into far-flung areas really fast.
Yeah.
And, like if you're trying to fly MREs into Afghanistan, you got to know where they're coming from, how many you need, where they're going, who's going to eat them, because you don't want more than you need. You don't want less than you need. You got to get it done perfectly. And the military's got some people who are really good at that kind of logistics.
Right.
I think if you sat down with a couple of folks who were used to running supply chains in the military and talked about how this is how we're going to roll out the vaccine to the 50 states, and then inside each state had a couple of people that were good with logistics to sit down and figure out how they're going to distribute it within the state itself, we could have avoided the problem that we've had. And some states are getting better with that. So like our hospital system is planning on standing up a drive-through clinic in an abandoned strip mall parking lot starting on Monday, because they know they're going to have the vaccine available then. And I've seen the ideas behind that plan, and it makes a ton of sense, and I think it's going to work great. It's just too bad that we don't see that kind of thing happening right from the get-go all around the country.
I'm a little curious about your thoughts there about the vaccine as far as getting into the people's arms. There's a little debate going on about stockpiling for the second dosage as opposed to going ahead and getting the first dose. And everything. So what are your thoughts about that?
So I feel pretty strongly about that. I was actually just talking, I know a guy online he's a adult intensive care doctor who splits his time between Montreal and New York City. And Montreal and a couple of other Canadian provinces have recently moved towards doing the sort of new model of trying to get more people the first dose and pushing the second dose back significantly. And as it stands right now, I'm very against that, because the science behind the vaccine showing that it was safe and effective was based upon the dose spacing of, I think, 21 days. Right. So if that's what you did the study with, and you know what the side effect percentile is with that sort of dosing spacing, and you know what the effectiveness of the vaccine after the second dose is with that kind of dose spacing, then especially with a vaccine like this that kind of moved through testing quickly, in order to get those results, you have to give it the way that it was tested. To then turn around and say, well, we're going to do it differently. We're going to give the first dose and then wait 6, 8, 12, whatever weeks and give the second dose. We don't know whether that's going to, one, be safe. It's possible that side effects would be more likely if you wait longer before you give the second dose. That's not very likely, but it's possible. We don't know. And it's also possible that you'll see people get some immunity after their first dose, and that immunity will wane. And then when you give the second dose really late, you just get the same thing, a little bump where you're immune for a little while, kind of, sort of, and then it wanes again. It may not give you the 99% or whatever that we're anticipating based on the way the vaccine was studied. And then lastly, the biggest complaint that the general public has had about the way the government has responded to COVID is to say one thing, do something different. You say follow the science and then recommend something that isn't supported by the science. So doing that with the vaccine, I think, is a terrible idea. Say, follow the science. The science says you should give the vaccine on day 1 and day 21, and then say, well, maybe not. Let's try doing something completely different and see what happens. I'm not a fan of that. And most physicians who I know are not a fan of that either.
Yeah. I see Dr. Davis there shaking her head in agreement, with that. With that as well. The idea is, but I am kind of curious. I want to try to shift here just for a moment, because I see a couple of people that are coming on and they're making some statements, and I wanted that. I don't want everybody to be necessarily yes people, right? And also I noticed that Jared Robinson is someone that I know, and you kind of know him by somebody else if you can think about the last name. But he and I have had a couple of discussions and everything. So we're going to I'm going to dive off a little bit, and I want to have a little bit of kind of like discussion about what he's saying. I've asked him about would he take the vaccine. He's saying no. He had already told me that he would not take the vaccine. Now, he has a couple of theories and everything of why he would not take the vaccine. And it says, like, he says that it is impossible to get everyone on board, especially knowing the 2011, I guess it's Boswitz versus Wyatt Supreme Court ruling that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe and vaccine manufacturers are not held liable in the case of vaccine injury. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Lucas?
Well, I mean, a couple things. One, so that ruling didn't say that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. The idea behind that ruling is that when you create something like a vaccine or new medication, there's always a chance that there's going to be consequences to that are not knowable ahead of time. So like one of the things I hear a lot of people say is, we don't know whether there's going to be problems with this vaccine 10 years down the line. That is 100% true. We don't know whether there's going to be problems with this vaccine 10 years down the line.
Right.
And because we don't know that, if you were going to make, the Johnny Davis vaccine, and we said, all right, so you did your studies that we asked you to do, we being the government, you did the studies that you're supposed to do. It looks like the vaccine's safe in the short term. If 10 years from now, it turns out there's a problem with the vaccine and you were going to be fiscally liable for every problem that arose with the vaccine, no one would ever produce a vaccine. So the reason why the vaccine courts or the vaccine injury courts exist was the governments said, what will help everybody feel better about vaccines is, one, to know that if there is a problem with a vaccine injury in the future, there's going to be a source of funding to help people that were injured that doesn't rely on the company. Because as you know, from a legal standpoint, if you got sued by 10,000 people that all had some significant injury, you could just close Johnny Davis vaccines down, and then that's the end of them getting any sort of income from your company. Once the company goes bankrupt, that source of funding is gone. So if there were to be a significant problem with a vaccine and you were relying on being able to sue the company for it, there'd be a good chance you would be left out in the wind, where the vaccine courts are funded differently, and that money's not going to just magically disappear by someone declaring bankruptcy. And then two, because that financial risk of an unknown consequence is taken off the manufacturer, they're more likely to produce a vaccine because they're not going to be held responsible for something they had no foresight of. Right. I could understand if the type of medical manufacturer, pharmaceutical lawsuits that make sense is when someone has done studies that showed there was a problem and those studies were intentionally pushed aside. That's just straight up fraud, and companies should be held not only financially, but I would argue criminally responsible for that. But if something that wasn't necessarily foreseeable turns out to be an issue, and once it's realized that is an issue, the company responds, I don't think that they should necessarily have to be financially responsible for something they could not have seen coming the entire time. That's why things like the vaccine courts are important. And I see there's a couple of other comments popping up about like $4 billion has been paid out in vaccine injuries. That's true. That has happened. There's a couple things about that, though. One, the standard of proof for a vaccine injury is way lower because there's a court specific for that than it would be for proving, like if you hit me in an auto accident, I said, oh man, my neck hurts, it's because Johnny T-boned me. You have to come to a certain level of proof for that. And the level of proof for that, or the level of fault that has to be shown for that versus a level of fault for some things in the vaccine court are tremendously lower. And if you look through some of the cases that have come through vaccine courts, there's a number of injuries that have been paid out through vaccine courts that scientifically are not tiable, at least at this point in time, to vaccines. Right. I'm not saying that vaccine injuries don't happen. And in fact, if your physician tells you, get the vaccine, there's no chance there's a problem, then you probably should look for a different physician because that's not an honest statement, just like anything else. But as the science stands now, the statistics of your chance of having a significant injury from this particular vaccine versus your risk of having a serious complication from coronavirus, it's overwhelmingly safer to take the vaccine than it is to take your chances with getting coronavirus.
Wow. Excellent. Well, I want to go ahead and also welcome our next guest on there, Dr. Cordula Davis there. How you doing, Doc?
Hey, I'm good. How you doing?
It's good. It's good to see you. Can you just kind of maybe add a little bit of your thoughts to what Dr. Lucas was just saying?
Yeah, sure. So I agree 100% with what he said. And, things and adverse outcomes do, happen with vaccinations as they do with anything that we do, in the world. Nothing is 100% safe. And,
Right.
as he said, you're a physician and no one can guarantee that something is not going to happen with a vaccine, just like we can't with a medication or anything like that.
Mhm.
The thing we have to remember is that when they do vaccine studies, just as they do with medication studies,
Mhm.
when adverse outcomes happen and bad things happen, association does not necessarily mean causation. So if something happens in a vaccine study that is bad, let's say someone has a reaction, or someone has a heart attack or something like that. So if something like that happens, that does not mean it necessarily happened because of the vaccination. And so like Dr. Lucas said, sometimes things are rewarded, either that there's a low threshold, and things need to be investigated. And it doesn't always mean it happened because of the vaccine, even if the timing is there. And so we have to think about those things. And that's how come, we have these vaccine studies, and we look at comparisons between the placebo, which means the people that did not receive the vaccine, versus the trial group, which is those who receive the vaccine, and compare things that happen between the two groups. And so sometimes things happen in both the placebo group and the group that received the vaccine. And if there's not a significant difference, then that means that those types of things are just as likely to happen in the placebo group as the group that did receive the vaccine. And so we have to be very careful, in saying that things cause things. And so, this happened, back in, the 70s, decades ago, with autism. And so people started to associate, autism with vaccines, and that was debunked many years ago. But yet
Mhm.
that association continues to be perpetuated, in the anti-vaccination community, and saying that they believe, that autism is caused by vaccinations, when that's been disproven. And so,
Yes. Yes.
we have to be careful with the difference. And so, that's one thing to point out. And then the second thing, that I'd like to really drive home, is that you have to think about risks. And so I think the person that noted that, saying that they're not going to personally take the vaccine, and that's okay. And so it's a risk calculation. So if you personally feel that your risk of getting COVID and suffering, the many potential complications from COVID, up into
Mhm.
including death or some of the long-term
Right.
complications, if you do survive, so there's many neurologic potential complications, lung complications that can result from this, cardiac complications,
Mhm.
that we still don't know the full term effects of. If your risk, you consider to be less than taking the risks of getting a vaccination,
Right.
which you have to weigh those things. That's a personal decision, and so people have to think about what that personal decision is for them. And so, from a scientific, perspective, I counsel my patients, and I, as a physician, feel that the risk of taking the vaccine is much, much less than the
Mhm.
risk of contracting COVID, and suffering from those potential consequences. And so that's how we counsel our patients. But again, that is a personal decision. If you feel like you'd rather take your chances, with getting COVID, and perhaps maybe having, not having any symptoms, that's the risk that you take. But I have to counsel them on what are the risks and the benefits of taking the vaccine. What are the risks and of potentially catching COVID. But it's about being informed, and making the best decision for you and for your family. And that's what it comes down to, at the end of the day. But I have to do my job as a physician. But like Dr. Lucas said, no one's trying to say, oh, there's no risks of taking the vaccine.
Right.
It's perfectly safe. Nothing could potentially happen to you, but it is relatively safe.
Right.
Take it,
Right.
but
Right.
that mean that you take it and nothing ever happens? No, nothing is 100% safe.
Sure. And we move forward on what we know as correct at the time, right? If we didn't, we would just stay where we would probably be cavemen, whatever, right?
Right.
So that's the thing. And I want to be respectful to Jared and his comments there. I see that he does not agreeing, which I knew he wouldn't, because I've had that conversation with him before. I know who he is, right? And
Right.
Dr. Lucas, you were going to interject something there.
Well, I was just going to say the other thing too that in Dr. Davis kind of brought this up is, it's an individual calculation that has to be done for every patient, and the way the vaccine is rolling out, they're rolling it out, especially now that it's being basically by age, they're rolling it out to the people who are most likely to have severe side effects from the infection. And at least during the 45,000 study patients, it looks like there's actually your risk of complications from the vaccine is probably inverse to your risk of complications with COVID, meaning that older patients are way more likely to have problems with COVID infection, but they're actually less likely to have some of the complications of the COVID vaccine. And then as you move younger and younger, that starts to tip the other way. And in particular, I'm a pediatric cardiologist, so the patients who I'm typically talking with are folks who are 18 and younger. The vaccines, depending on which vaccine you're talking about, the trials were either on 18 and older or 16 and older. So there's never been a COVID vaccine given to somebody less than 16 years of age. And those kids, by definition, kids statistically have a way lower risk of getting serious complications from a COVID infection. So if I was talking to my, 13-year-old niece versus my 86-year-old grandmother, the calculation of risk versus reward for the vaccine is very, very different. And because they're rolling the vaccine out the way, we've given something like 12 million doses now in the United States. Very quickly, we'll have tens and tens of millions of people that have gotten the vaccine, which will be more and more experienced about what the side effects are like, how common they are, and most importantly, is there some sort of pre-existing condition, particularly most likely autoimmune conditions that might make people more likely to have side effects, so we can know who we probably shouldn't be giving the vaccine to. So as time goes on, the calculation will be more and more accurate. There's definitely some potential risks of things that we don't know about the vaccine now, but the more people who have gotten it and the longer it's been out in the community, the less and less likely those potential unknown risks will become.
Awesome. Dr. Davis, I know you're just kind of joining on with us, but you also mentioned, I think, did you get the vaccine?
I did.
Tell me your experience with taking the vaccine.
Sure. My experience, I basically had a sore arm that first day, kind of like what you get with the tetanus shot. It was sore really in that entire day. It wasn't like the next day, but the next day it was completely gone. And I didn't have any side effects after that. I actually am due to receive my second vaccination tomorrow. So, I don't know what I'm going to experience with that. I have heard that there's potentially a little bit more side effects with the second vaccine than the first. Maybe some people have experienced fever, muscle aches, headache, fatigue. I've had some colleagues already receive theirs within my office this week. Some of them had fatigue, and then they haven't had any other symptoms. And usually the symptoms last about 24 hours and then resolve. And that's what I've heard so far. But I didn't have any. I felt more symptoms with getting a flu shot than I did with this, but that's just my personal experience.
Sure. Dr. Lucas, you've also taken the vaccine, correct?
Yeah, I have. And actually, I got my second dose a week ago today. It was last Friday about noontime. And I've never had a reaction to any vaccine previously. And fortunately, I've kept my streak alive. I didn't have any reaction to this either. Good. Just like Dr. Davis, I have some colleagues who had reactions, and it was, they had fevers for a while, or they felt chills, or had a sore arm, things like that. But in our hospital system, we've given out, this is part guess, but I think it's around 15,000 doses or something like that now. And they've had 3 what are considered moderate reactions. So, it was, 2 people had to use their asthma inhaler. And in one case in particular, it's not clear whether that was related to the vaccine or the person was quite nervous about getting the vaccine in the first place. And it may have had more to do with that. But nothing that didn't, that required any treatment outside of 10 or 15 minutes of getting the vaccine out of 15,000 doses that were given.
I don't know how I jump on this medical train, because you guys are medical professionals, but I agree. I'm waiting. I'm just waiting right now. If you guys had a shot, a vaccine, you can come right now. I will take a shot right now. On my show. I'm telling you, I don't have that fear. I have more trust in that. In our medical professionals, you always have little this and that and da-da-da and things. And I guess it kind of gets me a little bit with Jerry. He's a nice guy. He's really a nice guy, great family and everything. But we're going to get into this more, Jerry. I can't answer all your questions right now, but we're going to get into it a little bit more. But I want to go to another one of our viewers right now, Ashley Taylor. And she is also making a comment. And this kind of, she says, I'm hesitant to get the vaccine. I'm an active duty military. Usually we do not have an option to decline getting a vaccine unless we're allergic to something. The fact that it's optional concerns me. What would you say about that? Who wants to take that?
Well, I'll start with that. So I saw that comment pop up, and the reason I'm not military, so I'm not obvious. I didn't have any part of making this decision, but because there was so much concern, and there still is in the community, that this vaccine is going to become mandatory, and you're not going to, you're going to have to get it. I think to try to avoid that, the military has wisely made it optional to avoid tremendous amount of blowback from making something mandatory. So I think that's the fact that it was made optional is a response to people's concerns. So it's somewhat ironic that the fact that it was made optional is raising people's concern about it. But, especially for someone who's fairly young, and I would say the same thing to Jared, if you're not interested in getting the vaccine and you're concerned about it, then don't. No one's going to force you to, at least I hope. I would definitely not be in favor of making this mandatory, certainly not now. And I would argue not ever, because I don't think that, the goal from a public health standpoint is to get as many people as possible to take the vaccine to reduce the prevalence of the disease in the community. I don't think that trying to force people to get the vaccine is the right way to go about achieving that goal. In fact, it will probably paradoxically make it less likely that certain segments of the population take the vaccine. I mean, look how well mask mandates have worked. It's just doing that, saying you have to do this or you're going to get a fine or get arrested or whatnot, has just made people who are hesitant to wear a mask more certain that it's some big plot against them. Where I think if, like we talked about the last time you and I talked, I think if they had pushed that a little differently and said, hey, we need the public to help us out. This is what you can do to help us. Please do X, Y, and Z. I think they probably would have gotten a higher percentage compliance than they have with the stick method. The carrot is always a better idea than the stick.
Right. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Davis?
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And it's almost like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I mean, like they made it mandatory, people would have been upset, and then now that it's not, it's kind of like questionable. But I agree. I don't think it should be mandatory. Flu vaccination. I don't know if the flu vaccination is mandatory within the military, but I agree. I don't think it's ever going to be mandatory. Even with the pandemic. I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think it should. I don't think it should be forced. But I do think it's going to end up being kind of a seasonal thing, something that's going to have to happen probably yearly with the way that it's mutating and as viruses tend to do, just like with the flu vaccination. And it's just going to be something that we're going to be dealing with. I mean, the virus isn't going anywhere, so it's just people whether or not they want to take the vaccine.
Well, and Ashley brings up a good point. I was going to actually just insert that as well, is that there are some vaccinations that are mandatory. And I know that for a fact. So I'm a little curious about, Dr. Lucas, I guess you can take this one first. What would you think about sports teams and things like that, making it mandatory to have the vaccine, just like we make it mandatory to do exams?
Yeah, I think that's a completely different question than the government making something mandatory, because so I just saw Ashley just said the flu vaccine is mandatory for military. So that's the same, like in our hospital system during the flu season, you have a choice. You either get the flu shot or you have to wear a mask when you see patients during the flu season. And in our hospital system, and I think most other hospital systems, the COVID vaccine has not been made mandatory, again, because there's concern about it. But that's a different thing. There's a difference between an employer or a sports team saying you have to do whatnot. Like, if you want to fight in your kickboxing tournament, you got to wear 10-ounce gloves. I can't go, I don't like 10-ounce gloves. I want to wear 4-ounce gloves. It doesn't work that way. You want to wear 4-ounce gloves, you got to go fight MMA or do something different. So the same thing, if you said, starting next year, if you want to fight in our tournament, you have to either show that you're immune because of having, sorry, I'm on call, that's my pager going off. You either have to demonstrate immunity to COVID by having an antibody test, or you have to show that you've gotten the vaccine. That's your right, because you don't have a constitutional right to fight in Johnny Davis's tournament. Just like I can't fight in your tournament without paying, I can't fight without getting a medical exam, blah, blah, blah. Same thing with an employer. If you want to, and I think this is particularly important for people who are in allopathic medicine, if you're going to make your money by practicing allopathic medicine and then turn around and say, but I don't think that this particular part of allopathic medicine is correct, so I don't want to do it. So like, I don't want to get a flu shot. You know, it's hard for me to feel a lot of sympathy for that person versus John Q. Public, who isn't involved directly with, you know, advocating allopathic medicine in general, being forced by the government to do something to his body he doesn't want to do. I think that's a very different thing. I think it is likely you will see some industries of medicine probably being one of the first to make this mandatory in some way, shape, or form at some point in the future, especially if ongoing use of the vaccine shows that it's safe. But that's a different thing. Private industries and private employers mandating something is a much different thing to me than the government mandating something. The same thing in the military. You don't have to join the military. If you were, you know, if it was during Vietnam and you were drafted, a little bit different. But right now, when it's all volunteer, if you don't want to take the risk of getting, you know, the 6 or whatever shots for anthrax and God knows what else you're getting vaccinated for as you head off to other lands that the military mandates, then maybe the military is not for you.
Right, but there is some level of effectiveness or efficiency that we have to reach in order to get the majority of people vaccinated in order to kind of get rid of this thing or get it under control, right?
70%, I believe.
70%, right? You know, what do you think about the real opportunity of us making that happen with so much skepticism out there? What do you think, Dr. Davis?
It's going to be, we have to move faster. That's for sure. I mean, like, we're not anywhere. What did you say? About 12 million have been vaccinated so far. I mean, there's 350 million people in the United States. I mean, so we'll get there. I mean, I think we'll get there, hopefully within this year. But then you run into the problem of the mutation. So, but I do think we can get there. You know, 70% is not a hard goal. I mean, I don't think it's a difficult goal to reach. So not everybody has to be vaccinated in order for that to happen. I mean, so you have the people that refuse to get vaccinated, and that's fine. Not everybody has to be vaccinated in order for us to reach herd immunity.
Sure.
I don't think that's a difficult thing.
Well, thank you, Doc. One of the things that you know kind of blows me away is that people think all of a sudden that and one of the reasons why people are so fearful of the vaccine is because it's like, let's hurry up and rush this thing out. Let's just put something together and go put it in people's arms, right? That's what people seem to think. But that's not correct. Is it not?
No, it's not. And actually, mRNA is not a completely new technology. It has existed in some other technological aspects and some other viruses. And so they've actually applied that technology to this particular vaccine. And so, you know, and vaccines have been, you know, under development. Yeah. It's not a completely new technology. And so that's right. I think that you know, that is the case. And so, I think if people were to understand like how it works and how technology works and how vaccine development works, they would kind of understand it and trust it more. But I get where they're coming from. You know, that vaccines, you know, over the years have taken 10 years to fully develop, and I get that's the case. But you have to understand too that technology has advanced, you know, a lot over the past decade, over the past 2 years even. And so as we continue to go along, we make leaps and bounds, you know, in technological advancements. And also when we have a worldwide pandemic, we have the best and brightest minds coming together, you know, to try to, you know, fix this and fix what's going on. And so, you know, I understand their concerns. I really, really do. So I think we just, you know, need to approach, you know, educating the community, you know, from a better standpoint and trying to dispel some of the myths and the conspiracy theories that are out there and trying to help them to understand, you know, how the vaccine came about and that the technology is not completely new. It's not just made up out of thin air. It's enhancements of previous, you know, technologies that have been there. And so I think that's part of the problem.
We got to push harder to get that word out. What would you like to say on that, Dr. Lucas?
So I mean, basically exactly that. So there was a number of factors that led to them being able to come up with this vaccine quickly. So the first is we had 2 recent coronavirus pandemics that ended up not being as big of a deal as we had feared. So there was SARS and then MERS. both coronaviruses, and both of those had vaccines that were put under development, but the pandemic burned itself out before they needed to actually be released. But the experience in trying to work for immunizations against SARS and MERS helped. So they knew that the spike proteins in the coronavirus was a good target for the vaccine. So that was an important piece of information. And they knew that the general concept of how to make an mRNA vaccine that would produce that spike protein, that was pre-existing information. So we knew basically the hardest part of coming up with a vaccine is usually figuring out what part of the invading particle is necessary to get an immune response, but not sufficient to cause the actual disease. And we already knew the answer to that. And then because the actual genomic sequence of the coronavirus was made available in January of 2020, they knew exactly how to make the pieces part of the spike protein they needed. So they had all the pieces parts they needed. And once you know what you need to make and how to make it, if you throw money at that problem, you'll get it made fast. So that's what governments around the world did, is they, you take that amount of information and you go to companies and say, all right, stop working on 400,000 different things. We want you to make an mRNA vaccine for this spike protein, and we want you to make it now, and we're going to pay you X amount to do it, and we're going to guarantee that you get return on your investment.
Right, yeah.
Then voila, stir, and then you've got the vaccine. Right. So that's why it was able to be done so quickly. The safety steps, though, as far as the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, that all happened, but they happened really fast because when companies went and said, hey, we want volunteers for this vaccine, there was tens of thousands of people who were like, I want to be a part of fixing this. Where normally it's pretty difficult to get people to enroll in trials, and there's usually not a whole lot of money available for them because companies are trying to develop 300 different things simultaneously. So if you've got $300 and 300 projects, you can't put very much money in each individual one, where this was something they knew they had money for, and they were able to invest all of their efforts and energy into that one thing, and therefore it was able to be brought to fruition very, very quickly.
Right. And I know we got to start winding down here. I know you guys got a busy schedule, but I want to, and again, I got to go back to Jared here. I'm going to ask a kind of generalized question here. What is the danger in being pessimistic and putting it out there about this? And also on the other side of that, what is the danger and perhaps being maybe too optimistic and saying that this is why we maybe should, right? I mean, how do we balance this thing to try to get the best outcome?
You mean as far as the pandemic in general? Yes.
Well, and the vaccine. Because you got people who are saying, no way, no. And you got other people, perhaps like us, right, who are saying, hey, you probably, if you can, it's probably a good idea to get it, to go ahead and get the vaccine because it's more beneficial, as you were saying earlier, Dr. Davis, I remember you kind of alluded to this, is that it's better to get it than not get it, ultimately, right, if your body can handle it. But what is it about being too optimistic? How is that dangerous? Or is it more dangerous to be pessimistic about it?
I think you want to be realistic, really. I mean, I don't think you want to be either. Right?
Bam, there you go. I like that.
You definitely don't want to be pessimistic, because then people aren't going to want to get it. I mean, you don't want to scare people, right? Because then they're not going to want to get it. And you don't want to be, too optimistic. I don't know that those aren't really the right words either.
Right.
I mean, you just want to be a realist. I mean, okay. But you want to give people hope, right? That this will end the pandemic, because people are tired. They're fatigued. I mean, they want to get out there. They want life to get back to normal.
Yeah.
But I think you also want to be a realist and understanding that, the virus is going to be here, but we want to get as close as possible to normalcy, right? But life has probably changed for a long time. Life as we know it is going to be a little bit different. Right. And so trying to learn what that's going to look like, and so we have to give people a realistic picture. I mean, I don't want to sell somebody a dream and say, hey, masks are going to go away after we give them the vaccine. We don't ever have to wear masks again. I don't think we quite know that yet. I don't know if you guys talked before about whether the vaccines, I don't know that we have the data yet that it stops transmission transmission of the virus.
Right.
You know, so we still may be wearing masks for a little bit of time. I think it's important to be truthful with people. You know, I think you don't want to be too optimistic, because then, you know, you're not being honest with them. And so then you're like, well, I thought you told me I didn't have to wear a mask if
Right.
I took this vaccine. And so then they're pissed at you, because then you weren't honest and you lied. And so then they took the vaccine, and then they go out and, you know, and then they get sick. And so you don't want to do that. And then you don't want to be pessimistic either, because then they're just not going to take the vaccine. And so I think the best thing is to be just honest. And that's what people want, because, like, you know, as Dr. Lucas told them before, what they don't want is for us to say one thing and then we do something else, or we say one thing and then we change it. And it's because they don't trust us. So we have to just tell them the truth as we know it, you know, and I think that's always the best practice, is just tell them the truth as we know it, you know, and then if the science changes, then tell them the truth again. And I think that's always the best way to do things moving forward. You know, yeah, we want to be a little bit optimistic, because we're optimistic, right? I mean, we want things to get better, but I think it's just best to just tell the truth as it is.
Right, for sure. Well, you know, as I kind of wind down here again, I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to, God, and as I say that, I'm so long-winded, right? These questions start just in my brain, and I want to ask so many things, because this, to me, I'm just so intrigued by all of this, to be honest. But I'm going to calm down. I'm going to wind it down. But I do want to say this first. You alluded to the fact that people think after they take the vaccine that they become almost like Superman. That means, hey, come sneeze in my face, I got the vaccine. It's not like that, is it? You still need to be careful, right, Dr. Lucas?
Yeah, and it seems that way. And what Dr. Davis was getting at is you hear a lot of people say, well, why should I get the vaccine if I'm still going to have to socially distance and wear a mask afterwards? Right. Or more concerning, and this is a devilish little twist of words, is it's been shown the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission. And that's not true. The vaccine hasn't been shown to prevent transmission. That's different. So getting back to what Dr. Davis was saying about the science, you know, if you're going to practice science the way science is intended, that means you look for data, you analyze the data, and then come up with a hypothesis. And then until something proves that hypothesis wrong, you assume that that hypothesis is probably correct. But things change all the time. We see that constantly in medicine. The testing that was done for the vaccine was to see, does the vaccine reduce the incidence of severe COVID complications in the person who received the vaccine? That's what the test was designed for, and the study was designed for, and the study showed that was true. Trying to figure out whether it actually reduces your ability to transmit the disease to others is a completely different study that's much harder to do. Most people that I've spoken with assume, with assume being the important part of the word, that just like most other vaccines, if you've had the vaccine, you can't transmit the disease. But it's way safer, since we don't know that that's true with this vaccine yet, it's way safer to give people the vaccine to reduce their chance of getting severe COVID infection, and also continue doing the social distancing and masking, just in case that this virus is somehow unique, and that you could somehow have like a low level of non-systemic infection in your nasal pharynx that lets you spread it without actually getting complications yourself. That seems unlikely that that could happen, but until we know that it can't, we would expect that people will continue doing the social distancing and the masking to make sure that that wouldn't be potentially a problem.
Okay. Let me say this, and to close out now. Final question, I promise. Final question. But hopefully the goal here is to try to educate people. And I hope those people who will watch this video, and we are getting a lot more visibility on our YouTube pages, on our Facebook pages, and our sites and stuff like that. Hopefully somewhere down the line, somebody might look at this and say, hey, maybe I'm going to think twice about this. If indeed that happens, then we've been successful in coming together today. But my final question to you guys is, I want you right now, and we'll start with you, Dr. Davis, is to give your best argument and or debate on why people should take the vaccine. Go. I know.
Why they should take the vaccine. So I'm actually, I'm going to say because the risk of having a complication, either even if let's say you get COVID and you survive it, The long-term potential complications are great and even unknown yet. Or if you get it and unfortunately pass it to your grandmother or someone else sick, that unbeknownst to you, to a family member, the risk of transmitting it to them and killing them is greater. You know, the risk of taking the vaccine is much, 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 much lower. Vaccine is thus far shown to be very safe. So I say that the risk of getting of having complications from COVID, either you getting it yourself and having complications and or death, or spreading it to a family member or a friend is much, much higher than getting the vaccine. And so you be doing yourself, your friends, your families, and others great service by taking the vaccine. So that's
awesome. That's
my
awesome. Dr. Lucas, you get the final word.
Yeah, and I would basically say the exact same thing, is that if you look at the data that's available on the vaccine and the data that's available from COVID, especially for the patients who are currently eligible for the vaccine, the elderly, in probably in the near future, people who have significant pre-existing conditions, the risk of a side effect from the vaccine is significantly less than what the risk of having a significant side effect from getting COVID infection or a long-term effect from COVID infection is. So like Dr. Davis said earlier, you need to sit down, and each individual person needs to talk to their physician about their risks for COVID, their potential risks for the vaccine, and decide what's right for them. I don't really know any other way to put that. It's a matter of trying to objectively look at the science, facts, not your friend's theory, but actual facts that are demonstrable about what the risks are related to the vaccine and what the risks are related to the coronavirus. And I think you'll find for the overwhelming majority of people that don't have a specific potential complication to the vaccine, getting the vaccine is much safer than not.
Everybody will become immune to it one way or the other.
One way or the other. Well, look, guys, you guys are absolutely fantastic. I just really want to thank you for taking the time, for coming on and educating people about, listen, they can accept it or not. It's just the bottom line, right? But, we're doing the best we can and trying to educate people and trying to get the word out to other people. Hopefully they will heed some of this valuable advice. Dr. John Lucas, Dr. Cordula Davis, and Nurse Bundestein Godin, thanks so much for being on the show today. We'll talk to you guys soon, okay?
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jenny. Bye.
All right, guys, you just heard it. I mean, I just don't know what else to say. That, they have given their words. They've given a lot of good information about, whether you decide whether or not you want to take that vaccine or not. It's ultimately up to you. I know there's a lot of theories, a lot of conspiracies, a lot of information that's out there. You just have to kind of gather and make the best call that you possibly can. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today. I want to thank you so much for watching another edition of Johnny Davis Live. Be sure to like our AK Promotions page and our YouTube channels. We're trying to grow that channel as well. Please, guys, for right now, please wear that mask, wash those hands often, and always respect each other. This is Johnny Davis Live, and always Fort March. Bye-bye.